Ladies and gentlemen, there is a moment, quiet, subtle, but powerful, when an avoidant suddenly realizes you're done trying. It doesn't happen during a fight, it doesn't happen in the chaos of conflict, and it doesn't even happen the day you walk away. It happens later, when your silence becomes real, when your energy shifts, when the pattern they depended on finally breaks. That's the moment the avoidant stops feeling in control and starts feeling the truth. They've lost the one person who loved them consistently, deeply, and with more patience than they ever deserved. They don't break when you argue. They break when your silence replaces your effort, because an avoidant's sense of control has never been challenged by conflict. Arguments don't scare them. Emotional intensity doesn't shake them. In fact, when tensions rise, they retreat into the familiar comfort of distance, convinced that shutting down protects them. They've learned to survive by detaching, by pulling back, by disappearing into emotional shadows where no one can reach them. During fights, they feel justified in withdrawing. They see your pain as proof that closeness is dangerous. But silence, your silence, is something entirely different. Silence isn't chaos. Silence isn't emotion. Silence is finality. And finality is the one thing they've spent their whole life trying to avoid. When you were trying, they always felt 2 steps ahead. You explained your feelings, and they shrugged them off. You tried to talk through issues, and they closed up. You reached out, they pulled away. Every time you showed up with effort, it reassured them that they would never lose you. Their avoidance became a strategy, not a reaction. They believed that no matter how much they distanced, you would always be there to bridge the gap. They thought you would soften every silence with understanding, chase every cold moment with warmth, fill every empty space with love. They never imagined a version of you that could stop trying. But then something shifted inside you. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Somewhere along the journey, you gave too much, hurt too often, cried too deeply, and finally realized you had nothing left to give. You stopped explaining because explanations no longer mattered. You stopped reaching out because your hands were tired of holding the relationship alone. You stopped trying because trying became the very thing that was breaking you. And when you reached that level of emotional exhaustion, your silence became more powerful than any words you could have spoken. This is the moment the avoidant feels something unfamiliar. A loss of control. They aren't prepared for the stillness that comes when your effort disappears. They reach for the pattern they know, expecting you to fix the disconnect as you always did. But this time, nothing happens. They scroll through old messages, hoping to feel the safety of your warmth. They open the chat, waiting for your reassurance, your good morning text, the emotional lifeline you always offered. But instead, they find emptiness. At first, they rationalize it. They think you're busy, overwhelmed, giving them space. They tell themselves you'll reach out soon, because that's what you've always done. But when hours turn into days, days into weeks, and the silence becomes heavy instead of temporary, something begins to crack inside them. Their ego, which once kept them distant and safe, starts to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. Avoidants don't fear losing love. They fear needing love. And your silence forces them to feel that need for the first time. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects their own behavior back at them. It shows them the hurt they ignored, the affection they pushed away, the connection they never nurtured. It exposes how much of the relationship you carried on your own. They realize that the love they treated as guaranteed was never guaranteed at all. They see the truth they ran from. You were the anchor holding everything together, and without your effort, the entire connection collapses. For the first time, they feel what you felt all along: abandonment, confusion, emptiness. But there's a difference. You felt these emotions while still loving them. They feel them when your love has already withdrawn. That's why it breaks them. Avoidants don't process emotion in the middle of connection. They process it when connection is gone. They don't realize your worth while they have you. They realize it when they feel the void your absence leaves behind. Silence is the avoidance undoing because it forces them into stillness, and stillness forces them into self-awareness. They can no longer escape into distance because your distance now matches theirs. They can't run from feelings because the loss becomes louder than their fear. They can't dismiss your needs because those needs no longer belong to them. And in that moment, they finally understand the consequences of the very behavior they used to protect themselves. Your silence becomes the teacher their avoidance never allowed. It becomes the awakening they weren't ready for. It becomes the emotional truth they can no longer outrun. They don't break when you cry, or when you beg, or when you fight. They break when the person who always tried finally stops trying, because that's when they realize the one thing they never prepared for, losing someone who loved them more than they ever understood. They took your patience as permanence, until you stopped giving what they assumed would never run out, because avoidants are conditioned to believe that love isn't something that can disappear. They treat your consistency like a guarantee. They convince themselves that no matter how many times they pull away, no matter how distant they become, no matter how many mixed signals they send, you will always be there waiting, ready to fill the emotional gaps they create. They confuse your loyalty with a lack of options, your patience with dependency, your devotion with predictability, and predictability is where their illusion of control lives. They believe you'll always be the one to bend, the one to soften, the one to repair the disconnect. Avoidants don't understand the fragility of connection because they've spent their entire emotional life running from it. When someone shows them steady love, deep care, and emotional presence, they don't fully see its value. They see its availability. They see it as something that will always be there, no matter how carelessly they handle it. In their mind, your patience becomes part of the background of their life, like the sunrise, always there, always the same, always dependable. They never imagine a world in which your warmth stops warming them. They never consider the possibility that you could reach a limit. And that's exactly what happens. Patience is a beautiful thing. It's soft, compassionate, resilient. But patience is not infinite. There comes a point where the heart becomes tired, not because it stopped loving, but because it can no longer carry the emotional weight alone. Your patience starts to erode under the pressure of being the only one trying, the only one reaching, the only one emotionally present. Your soul gets tired of waiting for reciprocity that never arrives, for effort that never shows up, for connection you have to keep breathing life into, and eventually, something inside you shifts from trying to understanding, from maybe it will get better, to it's not my job to fix this alone. When that shift happens, your energy changes. You don't announce anything. You don't give them a warning. You don't issue ultimatums. Your heart simply stops having the strength to stretch itself so far. The things you once tolerated begin to feel heavy. The explanations you gave start sounding empty. The hope you held on to begins to feel like self-neglect. You stop chasing, stop initiating, stop repairing. This is where the avoidance awakening begins, because your absence breaks a pattern they relied on. Suddenly, the patience they treated as permanent disappears. And for the first time, they feel the consequences of their own distance. They feel the emptiness that follows your silence, the uncertainty that follows your withdrawal, the discomfort that follows your detachment. They are forced to confront the truth they've avoided their whole life. Nothing is permanent, not even someone's love. Avoidants fear abandonment, but they have never faced abandonment that comes from losing the person who stayed the longest. They expect people to leave when things get emotional or intense. What they don't expect is losing someone who was gentle, patient, loyal, and forgiving. Your departure doesn't confirm their fear. It shatters their illusion. Because if you can leave the one who loved them the most, then their strategy of distancing didn't protect them. It destroyed the one connection that was actually safe. That realization cuts deeper than any argument ever could. It forces them to see how they contributed to their own loss. They begin replaying every moment you stayed, every time you tried, every instance where you chose them despite how difficult it was. And now, with your patience gone, they finally see what that patience meant. They finally see the effort they never matched, the love they never reciprocated, the emotional presence they took for granted. Your absence turns into a mirror that reflects the truth they never wanted to face. They didn't lose you because you stopped loving. They lost you because they assumed they never could. They thought you were permanent. They thought your heart was indestructible. They thought your devotion was guaranteed. And now, they learn the most painful lesson of all: love isn't guaranteed when you don't nurture it. Hearts aren't permanent when you neglect them. Patience isn't endless when you take it for granted. Avoidants don't wake up when you cry. They wake up when you go quiet. They don't realize your worth when you're trying. They realize it when you've stopped. They don't value your presence until they feel your absence. And when they do, it hits them with a force they never prepared for. The patience they believed was permanent becomes the very thing they lose. And in losing it, they finally understand the depth of what they had. They avoided closeness to avoid pain, but the moment you walked away, the pain arrived anyway, stronger, sharper, and impossible to suppress. This is the core tragedy of avoidant attachment. Everything they do to protect themselves from emotional hurt becomes the very thing that guarantees it. They build walls thinking it will keep heartbreak out, but those walls end up trapping them in loneliness. They distance themselves believing it keeps them safe, but distance becomes the reason they lose the one person who cared. Avoidants don't realize this until the very moment the loss becomes real. When you stop trying, when you stop reaching, when you stop giving them the emotional presence they never knew they depended on. Avoidants spend their whole lives running from vulnerability. They've been wired to believe that closeness equals danger, that intimacy equals suffocation, that emotional honesty equals losing control. When someone gets close, they instinctively pull away, creating distance to regulate their anxiety. They convince themselves that pushing back is survival, that detachment is strength, that shutting down is protection. But the truth is, their fear is not of closeness, it's of loss. They don't fear love, they fear being dependent on it. And dependence terrifies them because dependence has disappointed them before, so they live in a constant state of emotional self-protection. They keep relationships on a string just tight enough not to break, but loose enough to feel safe. They love from a distance, hope without committing, connect without surrendering. But all these defensive strategies rest on one fragile assumption that you will always be there. They believe they can run without losing you. They believe they can withdraw without consequence. They believe they can avoid pain by avoiding emotional involvement. But then the day comes when you're not there anymore. Not because you're punishing them, not because you stopped caring, but because trying became too heavy for one heart to carry. And when you walk away, suddenly the very thing they feared becomes reality. The loss arrives, not in theory, not in fantasy, not as a distant possibility, but as a tangible, earth-shaking truth. They look around for the comfort of your presence and find only silence. They reach for the familiar reassurance of your effort and find only empty space. The emotional safety net they assumed would always be beneath them is gone. And that's the moment their avoidance fails. Avoidants are comfortable suppressing emotions theirs as long as the connection still exists. They can avoid confrontation, they can avoid conversations, they can avoid accountability. But they cannot avoid the emotional shock that hits when someone they depended on leaves. Because underneath all their detachment is a human heart that feels deeply, even if it hides those feelings from the world. Their fear of dependence didn't stop their heart from becoming connected to you. They just didn't allow themselves to admit it. And now, with you gone, they are forced to confront feelings they've been running from their whole life. Sadness, regret, longing, vulnerability. In that moment, the pain they avoided comes rushing back with interest. It shows up in quiet nights, in memories replaying on a loop, in sudden waves of emotion they can't explain. They feel the absence of your presence like a hollow space inside them. They realize how much comfort your consistency gave them. They remember your warmth, your patience, your softness, and all the walls they built suddenly feel suffocating instead of safe. Avoidants often believe that if they stay detached enough, heartbreak will never touch them. But this moment teaches them a truth they can't ignore. Avoiding pain doesn't protect you from it, it only postpones it. And when postponed pain arrives, it hits harder because it comes with regret. Regret for the moments they withdrew when they should have leaned in. Regret for the times they silenced themselves instead of speaking truth. Regret for the love they kept at arm's length until it slipped through their fingers. This is the turning point for many avoidants. Not because they suddenly feel love more deeply, but because they finally feel the consequences of avoiding it. Pain becomes their teacher. Loss becomes their wake-up call. Silence becomes the mirror that shows them everything they ignored. They begin to question their patterns, their behavior, their assumptions about love. For the first time, they see that distance didn't protect them. It destroyed what mattered most. And that realization is powerful. Because now, for the first time, they're not running from pain. They're sitting in it. They're not suppressing emotions. They're feeling them. They're not dismissing closeness. They're craving it. The moment you stopped trying didn't just change the relationship. It awakened a part of them that had been asleep for years. The pain they avoided became the pain that transformed them. And whether they reach out or stay silent, one truth remains. Losing you made them feel what their avoidance was built to prevent. And that's when the real internal shift begins. They return to themselves only when you return to yourself. Because for so long, the balance of your connection depended on you abandoning parts of who you were just to keep the relationship alive. You softened your voice, quieted your needs, regulated your emotions, and made yourself smaller every time they pulled away. You became the emotional caretaker, the stabilizer, the one holding the entire connection on your back. And while you were pouring your energy into keeping them close, they were pouring their energy into staying far enough to feel safe. But the moment you shift that energy back into yourself, something profound happens. Your clarity becomes their awakening. Avoidants don't understand the value of your presence when you're drowning in effort. They don't appreciate your love when it comes wrapped in self-sacrifice. They don't see your strength when it's hidden under your attempts to make everything smooth and unproblematic. When you're constantly trying, you become invisible. Your needs disappear behind your patience. Your desires get buried under your understanding. Your worth gets overshadowed by your willingness to keep holding on. They see the outcome of your effort, but they don't see the cost. And because they don't see the cost, they don't respect the value. That's why they don't wake up when you cry or plead or explain. Your emotional intensity threatens them. They interpret it as pressure, as engulfment, as a sign they're losing control. But when you return to yourself, quietly, calmly, without revenge, that's when everything changes. Your energy shifts from needy to neutral. Your heart shifts from chasing to observing. Your presence shifts from desperate to dignified. And avoidants feel that shift in ways they cannot articulate. They start noticing what they never noticed before. Your silence feels different now. It's not the silence of punishment. It's the silence of self-respect. Your absence feels heavier now. It's not the absence of manipulation. It's the absence of emotional labor. Your withdrawal feels unfamiliar now. It's not the withdrawal of fear. It's the withdrawal of someone who has finally chosen themselves. This shift forces them to look at themselves, and that's something avoidants rarely do unless reality demands it. When you were trying, they could stay blind. When you were overgiving, they could stay comfortable. When you were constantly present, they could stay complacent. But when you return to your own center, the emotional mirror flips. Suddenly, they have to confront the truth they avoided. They lost balance in the relationship because they never showed up with the same emotional courage you did. Returning to yourself means you stop chasing their potential and start acknowledging their patterns. It means you stop waiting for crumbs and start demanding consistency. It means you shift your focus from trying to be enough for them to realizing they were not meeting your needs. And when your energy stops pleading for love and starts radiating self-worth, it shakes something in them. They begin to see the strength you always had, but were too busy proving to show. They begin to realize how much emotional safety you provided, how much stability you contributed, how much softness you held for both of you. Avoidants awaken through contrast. They don't wake up when you give more. They wake up when you reclaim what is yours. They don't value your presence until they feel the gap left by yourself. Restoration. They don't understand your worth until your energy stops pouring into them and starts nourishing you. And it's not your withdrawal that breaks them. It's your transformation. The moment you return to yourself is the moment they finally see everything they overlooked. Because now you're no longer the person who keeps the relationship alive at the expense of your own peace. You're the person who chooses yourself even when you love them. You're the person who honors your emotional boundaries. You're the person who no longer confuses effort with worthiness. And that energy is powerful. It's magnetic, grounded, and quietly confident. Avoidants are drawn to that energy because it's the opposite of chaos. It's the opposite of pressure. It's the opposite of emotional noise. Your return to yourself exposes their imbalance. It shows them how one-sided things were. It forces them to confront the emptiness of their avoidance strategies. It reveals the truth they never wanted to see. You were never asking for too much. They were giving too little. You were never overwhelming, they were engaging. You were never clingy, they were emotionally absent. When you return to yourself, two things happen simultaneously. You reclaim your power, and they lose their comfort. And in that loss of comfort, in that sudden space where your effort used to be, they finally realize how much of the relationship depended on your emotional generosity. The moment you return to yourself is the moment they finally face their own patterns, their own fears, and their own contributions to the downfall. And that's when they wake up,